He called my life's work nothing and dumped his 3 feral children on my doorstep for a week-long vacation. He failed to realize he hadn't left his kids with a grandmother, but had just initiated a professional consultation with a retired systems provost. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. You're home doing nothing anyway. The phrase hit me like a physical blow, a verbal grenade launched from 2,000 miles away. My fingers tightened on the phone receiver, knuckles suddenly white. This wasn't a request. It was a statement of logistical fact. I'm leaving my 3 kids with you. We need a break from parenting. The speaker was my son-in-law, King. His voice, a slick, confident boom, always sounded like he was addressing a stadium, even over the phone. He never called me Mom. I was just Helen, a name he pronounced with the cool, detached air of a superior addressing an underling. I was Dr. Helen Grant, retired provost, author of 3 books, but to him, I was a line item in his itinerary. Danielle and I are completely burned out, he announced. Just slammed. We're flying to Bali for a week. Need to recharge the batteries. I gripped the receiver harder. My late husband and I had built our careers while both working more than 60 hours a week. We never had the luxury of being burned out. We were simply tired, and we carried on. My retirement, now 6 months old, was supposed to be a sanctuary of peace. Now King was launching a blitzkrieg against the calm of my Tuesday morning. We're dropping the kids off at your place in an hour, he continued, crushing any possibility of a response. It's the least you can do. He saw my lifetime of intellectual pursuit, my research, the university I helped build, and erased it all, replacing my entire legacy with a single dismissive verb, nothing. Before I could formulate a response, he delivered the final insulting directive. And don't call unless the house is on fire. We need a real break from parenting. We're going completely off-grid. Then he hung up. The dial tone was a dull, indifferent hum in my ear. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The ensuing silence was the heavy ringing that follows an explosion. He had not asked. He had informed. He had judged my life to be empty and decided to fill that perceived emptiness with his own inconvenient responsibilities. He saw me as a utility, a free, on-demand, no questions asked childcare service. For years, I had held my tongue, believing quiet patience was best for Danielle. I watched as my brilliant daughter slowly shrunk in his shadow, trading her promising career to be a supportive prop in his endless Instagram stories. But this wasn't just a lack of respect. This was a fundamental miscalculation. He had looked at a lifetime of logistical mastery, of strategic thinking, and he had seen nothing. He thought he was dropping off his children with their quiet, retired grandmother. He had no idea he was initiating a professional consultation with Dr. Helen Grant, a consultation for which the final invoice would be a thing of terrible, beautiful precision. He needed a break from parenting. I would teach him what the job actually entailed. My fingers locked around the arms of my leather chair. 60 minutes later, a monstrously large matte black SUV, a vehicle that looked more like a military assault craft than a family car, screeched to a halt in my driveway. The doors flew open, and chaos erupted. It was a disorganized, chaotic deployment. Danielle looked harried but beautiful in an expensive beige linen travel suit. King vaulted from the driver's seat, already on his phone, barking orders at some unseen subordinate. He was dressed for a luxury resort. He was a CEO, delegating an undesirable task, not a father dropping off his children. Then came the 3 grandchildren, a tiny feral tribe of neglect. Caleb, the eldest at 10, walked with a hunched, shuffling gait, his face illuminated by the ghostly blue light of a tablet. His eyes never left the screen. He didn't say hello. He was a zombie, his consciousness held captive by the glowing rectangle. Next came 7-year-old Zoe, already deep in a full-blown Category 5 tantrum. "But I want the pink one," she shrieked, the sound a piercing, grating assault on the neighborhood's quiet. "Not the purple one. I hate purple." She was fighting over a designer juice box. Finally, Elijah, a 4-year-old whirlwind of pure untamed aid. He tumbled out of the car, his face and hands smeared with the sticky brown remnants of a chocolate bar. He saw my prize-winning rose bushes, let out a whoop of chaotic glee, and immediately began trying to climb one, leaving brown smudges on the pristine white petals. King gestured impatiently toward the back of the SUV, where 3 small, expensive-looking suitcases sat. Danielle was engaged in a futile, high-pitched negotiation with Zoe. "Sweetie, please," Danielle begged, her voice thin. "Mommy and Daddy need you to be a good girl for Grandma. The purple juice is just as yummy." Zoe's only response was to throw the purple juice box on the ground, where it burst, sending a spray of sticky violet liquid across my blue stone walkway. The entire drop-off took less than 5 minutes. King ended his call and unceremoniously dumped the 3 suitcases on my lawn. He didn't bring them to the door. He strode over, gave me a brief, condescending peck on the cheek, and said, "They're all yours. Their tablets are in their bags. Just keep them charged, and they'll be fine." Easiest babysitting job in the world. Danielle gave me a quick, frantic hug, her face a mixture of guilt and relief. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered, her eyes pleading with me not to make a fuss. "We just really need this. We'll call you from Bali." A promise I knew she had no intention of keeping. Then they were gone. They sped away in their urban assault vehicle, leaving me on my front lawn with their 3 feral children, their luggage, and a spreading purple stain on my walkway. Caleb was staring at his tablet. Zoe was screaming that she hated my roses. Elijah had successfully pulled an entire branch off a prize-winning bush. I looked at the scene of carnage. This was not a family. This was a failed state. The assessment phase had begun. The first 24 hours in my home were a hostile occupation. My quiet, orderly sanctuary was transformed into a chaotic, high-decibel disaster zone. It was a living, breathing case study in catastrophic systems failure. I did not attempt to impose order immediately. My first duty as a strategist was to observe, to gather data, to understand the full scope of the problem. I moved through the day like a field researcher, notebook in hand, documenting the operational dynamics of this 3-person tribe. The findings were grim. Caleb, the eldest, was a ghost in the machine. He had claimed the armchair in the corner of my living room and hadn't moved from it for hours. His tablet was a direct and constant intravenous drip of digital stimulation. His entire world. My attempts at conversation were met with monosyllabic grunts, his eyes never leaving the screen. He was not just withdrawn. He was completely disconnected from the physical world. When I announced lunch was ready, he didn't respond until I physically stood between him and his screen. The look he gave me was one of pure, venomous resentment. He ate his sandwich in 3 large, angry bites and was back in his chair before I had even sat down. His operational system was one of complete sensory isolation, his only input a stream of flickering pixels. Zoe was a master of emotional terrorism. Her tantrums were not spontaneous outbursts of feeling. They were calculated strategic maneuvers. She had been trained through a lack of consistent boundaries to understand that a sufficiently loud and prolonged display of outrage was the most efficient tool for achieving any objective. She did not want the apple slices I offered. She wanted the cookies on the high shelf. When I calmly said no, the tantrum began. It was a performance of shocking intensity, a full-body commitment to shrieking, crying, and stomping that lasted for a full, uninterrupted 17 minutes. Her system was simple: demand, escalate, and conquer. Elijah, the youngest, was a creature of pure, unadulterated chaos. He was not malicious. He was simply a force of nature that had never been taught the basic laws of domestic physics. He saw my collection of antique glass paperweights not as art, but as balls to be thrown. He viewed the walls of my hallway as a canvas for his sticky, jam-covered hands. In the span of a single afternoon, he broke a priceless Venetian glass vase my husband had given me, unspooled 3 entire rolls of toilet paper, and managed to lock himself in the pantry. He was a system without an operating system, a whirlwind of energy with no direction and no boundaries. By the time evening fell, I was not just tired. I was deeply, profoundly alarmed. The house was a wreck. The children were miserable, each trapped in their own dysfunctional loop of behavior. They were not a team. They were 3 isolated, competing entities. This was not a case of children being a handful. This was the direct, predictable result of a catastrophic failure in the most critical system of all: parenting. King and Danielle had not been raising children. They had been managing a series of inconveniences with the path of least resistance: capitulation for the loud one, screams for the quiet one, and benign neglect for the wild one. That night, after a storm of protest and negotiation finally led to bedtime, I retreated to my study. I looked at the pages filled with my grim observations. The grandmother was exhausted, but Dr. Helen Grant, the systems analyst and provost who had restructured entire university departments, was just getting started. My study became a war room. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by the familiar electric hum of a complex problem demanding a systematic solution. The challenge was no longer personal. It was professional. I wrote the name at the top of a fresh sheet of paper: Project Phoenix. The objective: to take the ashes of this failed domestic system and, in 7 days, build something functional, orderly, something that could rise. I was not a grandmother planning a week with her grandkids. I was Dr. Helen Grant, drafting a proposal for a high-stakes, short-term institutional turnaround. My first step was to define the core principles of the new system. The old system, or lack thereof, was based on chaos, capitulation, and digital pacification. The new system would be built on 3 pillars: structure, contribution, and engagement. I took out a large piece of poster board and a set of colored markers. I drew a grid. I began to block out a new non-negotiable map of their days. 7 a.m. Wake up and morning routine. 8:09 a.m. Contribution hour. 9:00 a.m. Active learning block. 1:00 p.m. Quiet time. No screens. I designed a household logistics board. These were not chores. They were contributions to the successful operation of our shared system. Caleb, 10, set the table, led librarian during read aloud. Zoe, or 7, feed the cat, clear her own plate, weather reporter. Elijah, 4, put toys in the designated bin, water one specific indestructible plant. Finally, for engagement, I created a week-long curriculum designed to target each child's needs. For Caleb, I would leverage his aptitude for focused, screen-based activity into a physical world project, a multi-stage model rocketry kit. For Zoe, I would address her emotional dysregulation with the creation of a feelings chart. For Elijah, his chaos needed channeling, a large-scale outdoor fort-building initiative. The plan was a comprehensive, multi-layered strategic intervention. King thought he had dropped his children off for a week of free babysitting. He had no idea he had just enrolled them in the Helen Grant Academy for Systemic Reformation. The tuition, I decided in that moment, would be astronomical. The rollout of Project Phoenix began the next morning at precisely 7:00 a.m. It was met with immediate, fierce, and entirely predictable resistance. I had not initiated a new schedule. I had declared war on established anarchy, and the insurgents were not going to surrender without a fight. The first battle was fought over Caleb's tablet. I found him in his usual armchair, already deep in the glowing abyss of his device. I did not ask. I informed him that the tablet's operational hours were now from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. daily, as per the chart. The meltdown was spectacular. It was not loud like his sister's, but a quiet, intense implosion. He went rigid, his knuckles white as he clutched the device. When I gently but firmly took it and placed it on a high shelf in my study, he let out a guttural, wounded sound. He refused to speak. He refused breakfast. He sat, a sullen, resentful statue, radiating pure, concentrated fury. I did not engage. I simply announced the start of contribution hour. The second battle was, of course, with Zoe. She took one look at the cat food and declared, "That's yucky. I'm not touching it." "That is your contribution to our household system this morning," I stated calmly, consulting my clipboard. "No," she shrieked, "and if you make me, I'll scream so loud all the windows will break." This was the critical moment. Capitulation was the old system. I knelt down to her level, my voice quiet but unyielding. "You have two choices, Zoe. You can choose to make your contribution and feel proud, or you can choose to spend the next block of time in the quiet corner until you are ready to rejoin our system. Screaming will not be a third choice." Her tantrum began as promised. Instead of negotiating, I simply picked her up and carried her to the designated quiet corner. "When you are calm and ready to contribute, you may rejoin us." The screaming continued for 17 minutes. But when it was over, she tearfully, resentfully, put a single scoop of food in the cat's bowl. It was a victory. Elijah, the agent of chaos, was simply confused. The absence of reaction to his usual whirlwind of activity was disorienting. When he tried to climb the curtains, I did not shout. I redirected him to the pile of building blocks for the active learning block. When he threw a block, I did not punish him. I removed the blocks and informed him they would return when he was ready to use them for building. The first 2 days were a relentless series of small, exhausting skirmishes. I was a combined force of drill sergeant, hostage negotiator, and Zen master. I was unshakable. I followed the color-coded chart with the dispassionate precision of a computer executing its code. I framed the conflict not against me, but against the unyielding logic of the new orderly world. I was tired. I was drained. But I was also invigorated. This was a complex, failing system, and I was debugging it in real time. The old chaotic system was dying, and a new, more logical one was slowly, painfully, being born in its place. On the third day, while the children were grudgingly engaged in quiet time, Caleb staring resentfully at the wall, Zoe flipping angrily through a picture book, Elijah actually asleep, I decided to tackle the disaster zone that was their luggage. Their suitcases were a testament to their parents' chaotic, hands-off approach. Half-eaten snacks had created sticky, unidentifiable messes. I was sorting through Caleb's backpack, a jumble of crumpled papers and a leaking juice box, when my fingers brushed against a thick, glossy piece of cardstock. I pulled it out. It was a flyer, an expensive, professionally designed piece of marketing propaganda. The headline, in a bold, aggressive font, read, "The Apex Summit." Beneath it was a picture of my son-in-law, King, standing on a stage, his arms outstretched in a messianic pose. I scanned the text, a fire hose of empty, high-octane jargon. Synergize your success. Monetize your passion. Optimize Your Life. It was an advertisement for a 2-day high-priced hustle culture seminar, promising to teach entrepreneurs how to systematize their lives for maximum efficiency. Then I saw the date. The summit, the grand coronation of King's self-proclaimed genius, was scheduled for the very day they were due to return from Bali, the day they were supposed to pick up their children. The hypocrisy was a physical blow. He was selling a fantasy of a perfectly systematized, optimized life to hundreds of paying disciples, while the most important system in his own life, his own family, was in a state of catastrophic, neglected failure. His break from parenting was not a restorative vacation. It was a business trip. He hadn't outsourced his children for his well-being. He had done it for his brand. The children were an inconvenience, an obstacle to the flawless image of success he was selling. A cold, clear, and absolutely diamond-hard anger settled in my chest. This was the focused, righteous fury of a lifelong academic who had just discovered a case of profound, world-class intellectual fraud. He was not just a bad parent. He was a charlatan. In that moment, the entire scope and purpose of Project Phoenix shifted. My initial plan had been a private lesson, an act of personal justice. But this discovery demanded more. This was not a private matter. This was a public fraud, and public frauds demand a public reckoning. I looked at the flyer, at King's smug, triumphant face. He wanted to stand on a stage and be hailed as a master of systems. Very well. He would have his audience. He would have his stage. But I would be the one to deliver the keynote address. The private lesson was over. The public execution was now being planned. The turning point, the moment the tide of the war truly shifted, came on the morning of day 4. It was not a single dramatic event, but a series of small, quiet victories that signaled the successful implementation of the new system. The first victory was with Caleb. He appeared at the breakfast table without being prompted. The sullen, resentful fog of his screen withdrawal had begun to lift. He was quiet, but it was a watchful, observant quiet, not the closed-off silence of his digital cocoon. After breakfast, during the active learning block, I brought out the model rocketry kit. I didn't push. I simply opened the box, laid out the intricate plastic parts and the complex diagram-filled instructions, and began to work on it myself. For 20 minutes, he just watched me, his expression a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Then he pointed a finger at one of the diagrams. "That fin is backward," he said. His first unsolicited complete sentence of the week. "Is it?" I asked, feigning confusion. "I'm not very good at this. It looks so complicated." A long, dramatic sound of put-upon expertise hissed out of him, and he slid into the chair opposite me. "You have to match the part number to the diagram," he explained, his voice filled with the weary patience of a genius explaining the obvious to a simpleton. "See? A7 goes into slot B4. For the next 2 hours, we worked in companionable silence. His long, nimble fingers, so accustomed to the frantic twitching of a game controller, were surprisingly adept at handling the small, delicate parts. His mind, used to navigating the arbitrary rules of a digital world, was a natural at deciphering the complex logical language of the schematic. He was absorbed. He had found a system more compelling, more real than the one on his tablet. The second victory was with Zoe. During contribution hour, she began to protest her assigned task of watering the plants. Her face started to crumple, the familiar prelude to a tantrum. But before the storm could break, I pointed to the feelings chart we had created, which was now taped to the kitchen wall. "Zoe," I said calmly, "I can see you are feeling frustrated. Can you show me on the chart?" She looked at the chart, at the silly hand-drawn faces for happy, sad, angry, and frustrated. She hesitated, her lower lip trembling. Then she walked to the chart and put her small finger firmly on the frustrated face. "I'm frustrated," she said, her voice a little wobbly. "Watering is boring." "Thank you for using your words to tell me that," I replied, my voice filled with genuine praise. "That is a much more effective way to communicate than screaming. I understand it's boring, but it is your contribution to our system today. After you are finished, during creative play, you can choose the activity for all of us." How does that sound? It was a negotiation, but one based on logic and emotional regulation, not on the brute force of a tantrum. She considered my offer, her little face a mask of concentration. "Okay," she finally said, "but I want to do painting with the messy paints." "A deal," I said. The tantrum had been averted. A new, more effective system of communication had been successfully deployed. Even Elijah, the agent of chaos, was beginning to bend to the will of the new order. His energy was now being channeled into the grand ongoing project of building a fort in the backyard. His actions, which had once been random and destructive, were now purposeful. He was a construction worker, a soldier, an explorer. He was still a whirlwind, but now the whirlwind had a direction. That evening, as I tucked them into bed, the house was not just quiet. It was peaceful. A productive, happy order had replaced the chaotic, miserable anarchy. They were a functioning system. Project Phoenix was a success. I had created a thriving, functional unit through the simple application of logic, structure, and respect. The proof of concept was complete. The case study was ready. Now it was time to prepare it for presentation. With the success of Project Phoenix, now a demonstrable empirical fact, the next phase of my own plan began. It was time to move from the domestic laboratory to the public theater. It was time to arrange the stage for the final dramatic act. My target was no longer just my son-in-law. It was his entire fraudulent brand. The Apex Summit was his chosen battleground, the perfect venue for his public undoing. But to get on that stage, I needed an ally, an inside agent who could insert me into the program like a surgical strike. I sat in my study and made a single phone call. The woman I called was Eleanor Vance, a name that carried immense weight in the city's corporate circles. Eleanor had been a friend for 40 years, a sharp, brilliant businesswoman who now sat on the board of directors for the Corporate Leadership Association, the primary sponsor of King's Summit. She answered on the second ring, her voice the familiar, brisk, no-nonsense instrument I knew so well. "Helen," she said, her tone a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "To what do I owe this? I thought you were deep in the quiet joys of retirement." "Retirement has been temporarily postponed due to a domestic system's failure," I replied, my voice dry. "I find myself in need of a favor, Eleanor, a rather unusual one." "I'm listening," she said, her curiosity piqued. "You're on the board for the CLA, aren't you?" I asked. "They're sponsoring that ridiculous Apex Summit this weekend." "Unfortunately, yes," she sighed. "A regrettable concession to our marketing department's obsession with a younger demographic. It's a festival of buzzwords and bad suits." "Why on earth would you be interested in that?" "I'm not interested in attending," I said. "I'm interested in speaking. I need a 20-minute keynote slot, preferably right before the final speaker of the day." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You," Eleanor finally said, a slow, delighted laugh beginning to form. "Helen, you haven't given a public address since your retirement gala, and you want your grand return to be at a hustle culture seminar for tech bros. I have a case study I'd like to present," I explained, my voice cool and professional. "It's a fascinating look at a rapid, high-stakes systems implementation. I'm calling it Project Phoenix. It's about taking a failing, chaotic, and deeply inefficient system and turning it into a thriving, productive one in just 7 days. It's highly relevant to your audience of entrepreneurs. It's all about results. Eleanor was no fool. She could hear the steel beneath the academic language. A failing system, you say? She asked, a knowing, predatory gleam in her voice. This wouldn't happen to have anything to do with that son-in-law of yours, would it? The one who sells snake oil on the internet? I can neither confirm nor deny the specifics of the case study until the presentation itself, I replied. The model of academic discretion. But I can promise you, it will be the most talked about session of the entire summit. It will be a masterclass in accountability. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I could almost hear the gears of her own strategic mind turning. She appreciated a beautifully executed corporate takedown. Consider it done, she said finally, her voice filled with a newfound gleeful excitement. I'll make the call. They'll be thrilled to have the legendary Dr. Helen Grant on their stage. We'll bill it as a surprise visionary keynote. Send my office your bio and your tech requirements. And Helen, she added, with a low, wicked chuckle. Break a leg. The ambush was now officially in motion. The bait was the promise of my own legendary name. The unsuspecting organizers would see it as a coup, a chance to lend their superficial event some real intellectual gravitas. They had no idea they were about to become the hosts of a live public demolition. With my keynote address now locked into the summit schedule, the final 2 days of Project Phoenix were dedicated to preparing the instruments of King's public humiliation. This was no longer just about transforming the children. It was about documenting that transformation in a format so professional, so clinical, and so devastatingly thorough that it would leave no room for argument. My first task was to create the PowerPoint presentation. It was titled simply Project Phoenix, a case study in applied systems and rapid turnaround. The first slide was a stark, text-only introduction. Objective: to analyze a critically failing domestic system and implement a strategic intervention to achieve measurable positive outcomes within a 68-hour time frame. The following slides were a masterclass in data-driven analysis. One chart, titled Reduction in Negative Behavioral Incidents, showed a dramatic day-by-day downward slope. Day 1, 17 incidents. Day 7, 1 incident. Another chart tracked screen time versus engaged activity, showing the blue bar of the tablet shrinking to a tiny sliver. I included photographs, not of the children's faces, but of the evidence of their transformation. A picture of the chaotic, toy-strewn living room on day 1, juxtaposed with the picture of the same room on day 7, clean and orderly, with the completed puzzle proudly displayed. A photo of the finished, beautifully constructed model rocket. The final slide was a summary of the project's key takeaways, written in the dry academic jargon that would resonate with an audience of business leaders. Conclusion: the primary variable for success is not the state of the subjects, but the commitment of the system's administrators. It was a direct, brutal indictment of King and Danielle's parenting, disguised as a scholarly conclusion. My second task was to prepare the invoice. I designed a professional invoice template, complete with the university's crest and my official retired title, Dr. Helen Grant, Provost Emeritus. I began to itemize the services rendered. I did not use the word babysitting. The language was corporate, clinical, and crushingly expensive. Initial systems analysis and diagnostic assessment, 3 subjects, 10 hours at $500 per hour, design and implementation of customized educational and behavioral curriculum. Project Phoenix, 20 hours at $500 per hour. 24/7 on-call crisis management and emotional de-escalation services, 168 hours at $100 per hour. be janitorial and property damage remediation, broken vase, jam-stained walls, $1,500 flat rate. I totaled the amount. The final figure, printed in a bold, uncompromising font at the bottom of the page, was $51,755. I printed the invoice on heavy cream-colored bond paper, the kind reserved for official university correspondence. I placed it and the presentation in a crisp professional portfolio. The weapons were forged. They were weapons of pure, unassailable logic, of data, of a lifetime of professional expertise. King had dismissed me as a woman who did nothing. I now held in my hands the monetized, documented, and utterly devastating proof of the true value of that nothing. I was about to present it to the world. On the final day of Project Phoenix, a palpable sense of calm, productive energy filled my home. The children, now fully integrated into the new system, moved through the morning routine with a quiet, practiced efficiency. Caleb, a boy transformed, put the finishing touches on his model rocket, his brow furrowed in concentration. Zoe, a child who had once communicated only in shrieks, was carefully explaining the day's weather forecast to me, pointing at the clouds outside the window. And Elijah, my little agent of chaos, was dutifully watering his plant, his movements careful and deliberate. The puzzle was complete, and the promise of a trip to the Science Museum loomed large and exciting. It was into this newfound peace that the first communication from the outside world arrived. It was a text message on my phone from an unknown number, presumably a disposable one they had purchased in Bali. It was from Danielle. "Hey Mom, back in town. Amazing trip. So refreshed. We're heading straight to the hotel for King's Summit. He's the keynote. So proud. We'll swing by to pick up the kids sometime after it's over. Hope they weren't too much trouble. See you later." The message was a perfect distillation of their entire worldview. Breezy, self-absorbed, and utterly clueless. There was no question about how the children were, no expression of gratitude, just a casual announcement of their future convenience. Hope they weren't too much trouble. The phrase was a final, damning piece of evidence of their complete disconnect from the reality of their own children's lives. I looked at the text, then at the 3 happy, engaged children in my living room. They had not been trouble. They had been a project, a challenge, a system in need of repair. And their parents, the self-proclaimed masters of optimization, were returning not to them, but to a stage, to an audience, to the empty performance of a life they were not actually living. I showed the children the text. Mommy and Daddy are back from their trip. They have a work event to go to, and then we are all going to meet them there later. But first, I said, my voice filled with genuine excitement, we have a date with the museum. The trip to the Science Museum was a joy, a celebration of the success of our new system. The children were not the chaotic, miserable creatures who had been dropped on my lawn a week ago. Caleb explained the principles of aerodynamics in the aerospace exhibit, pointing out features that matched his model. Zoe proudly identified the different emotions on the anatomical models. Elijah was mesmerized by the simple, elegant logic of a pendulum exhibit, his chaotic energy finally tamed by the beauty of a predictable system. As we left the museum, their faces sticky with celebratory ice cream, I felt a pang of profound, genuine sorrow. Not for myself, but for them. They were wonderful, brilliant, fascinating little human beings. And their parents were missing it all, trading these precious, fleeting moments of real, authentic connection for the cheap, fleeting applause of strangers. We drove not home, but to a luxury hotel in the heart of the city. The children, dressed in the new, clean clothes I had bought them, looked like the well-cared for, happy children they had become. They had no idea they were about to become the star witnesses in the public trial of their own parents. They were just excited for another adventure, and I, their commander-in-chief, was ready to lead them into the final decisive battle. The lobby was a swarm of ambition, filled with men and women in sharp, expensive suits. They spoke in the loud, confident tones of people who believed they were on the verge of greatness. It was the congregation of King's Church of Hustle. I navigated the three children through the crowd with the calm, purposeful air of a ship's captain steering through a storm. Our quiet, self-contained unit moved through their frantic energy untouched. I had arranged with Eleanor to be escorted through a side entrance, bypassing the registration desk. A discreet staffer met us and led us to a small, private waiting room just off the main conference hall. "Dr. Grant," she said, her voice filled with respect. "Miss Vance asked me to make sure you were comfortable. You'll be on in 20 minutes. I thanked her. The children, wide-eyed at the scale of the place, settled down with the books I had brought. The calm before the storm. Inside the main hall, King and Danielle were making their grand entrance. I could hear the swell of applause, the booming voice of the MC. I pictured them swaggering down the center aisle, the triumphant king and queen of their tacky, self-made kingdom. They would take their seats, completely, blissfully unaware of the ambush that was about to be sprung. 5 minutes before my scheduled time, the staffer returned. "We're ready for you, Dr. Grant," she whispered. I took Caleb and Zoe by the hand. Elijah, tired from our museum adventure, was now asleep in my arms. I followed the woman down a quiet, carpeted hallway that ran behind the main stage. I could hear the current speaker wrapping up her presentation on the synergy of self-branding. Then the MC's voice boomed through the speakers again. "Thank you, Tiffany. Let's give her a huge Apex Summit round of applause." A wave of polite, scattered applause. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice continued, a new, more excited energy in his tone, "we have a last-minute addition to our schedule, a true surprise, a chance to hear from a living legend in the world of systems and logistics, a woman whose work has shaped the very way we think about efficiency and organizational structure. Please welcome to the stage for a visionary keynote address, the one, the only Dr. Helen Grant." I took a deep breath. I could hear the confused murmur of the crowd, then a swell of more genuine, more respectful applause from the older, more established business leaders in the room who recognized my name. But I was not listening for them. I was imagining the look on two faces in the front row. The look of pure, uncomprehending, jaw-dropping horror. The look of two self-proclaimed masters of the universe, realizing that the universe was far larger, far more complex, and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The trap had been sprung. The ambush was complete. I walked onto the stage, not with the high-energy swagger of the other speakers, but with the quiet, unshakable poise of a lifelong academic. The stage was vast, dominated by a massive screen. The lights were hot and blinding. I could not see individual faces in the audience, only a great dark sea of them. But I knew that two of those faces, the only two that mattered, were staring at me in a state of catatonic shock. I adjusted the microphone, my movements calm and deliberate. The children stood quietly beside me, a small, well-behaved honor guard. The murmur in the room died down, replaced by a tense, curious silence. They did not know what to expect. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice clear and steady, the voice of a provost addressing a new class of students. "My name is Dr. Helen Grant. For 40 years, my professional life was dedicated to the study of systems, logistical systems, educational systems, organizational systems. I have always believed that any system, no matter how complex or chaotic, can be understood, analyzed, and optimized." I paused. letting the words settle. Today, I am here to present a case study, a look at a recent short-term pro bono consultation I undertook. I call it Project Phoenix. The first slide of my PowerPoint presentation clicked onto the massive screen behind me. The objective, I continued, my voice the cool, dispassionate instrument of a scientist, was to take a critically failing domestic entity, an organization in a state of near-total systemic collapse, and to implement a strategic intervention designed to achieve measurable positive outcomes within a strictly limited 6 to 8-hour time frame. A ripple of confusion and fascination went through the audience. This was not the usual motivational fluff they were used to. This was something different, something real. I clicked to the next slide. It showed the side-by-side photos of the living room. Day 1, a chaotic disaster zone, and Day 7, a model of clean, productive order. The subject entity, I stated, was characterized by a lack of clear operational protocols, zero accountability, and a profound over-reliance on inefficient, low-yield pacification strategies. I moved through my presentation with a crisp, relentless efficiency. I showed them the charts, the graph tracking the dramatic reduction in negative behavioral incidents, the bar chart illustrating the pivot from passive screen time to active, engaged learning. I explained the implementation of the contribution board, the strategic deployment of the feelings chart, the channeling of chaotic energy into productive, goal-oriented play, the audience of entrepreneurs, of people who genuinely understood and respected the language of data and efficiency, was captivated. They saw a master at work, breaking down a complex problem into its component parts and solving it with a kind of brutal, beautiful logic. They had no idea that the failing domestic entity was the family of the very man who had organized the conference. They just saw a brilliant, powerful woman delivering a masterclass in what they all claim to value most: results. I was not emotional. I was not accusatory. I was simply presenting the data. And the data, in its cold, irrefutable clarity, was the most devastating indictment of all. It was a systematic, point-by-point demolition of King's entire worldview, a public refutation of his brand delivered in the very temple he had built to celebrate it. My presentation reached its final, devastating phase. I had laid out the problem. I had detailed the methodology. I had presented the data-driven results. All that remained was the living proof. A system's success, however, I said, my voice resonating with a new, more personal authority, is not measured in charts and graphs alone. It is measured in the transformed state of its core components. The ultimate validation of Project Phoenix is not on this screen. It is standing right here beside me. I turned and smiled at my grandchildren. I would like to introduce you to the lead subjects of my case study. I knelt down beside Caleb. This is the project's lead engineer, I said, my voice filled with genuine maternal pride. Caleb, would you like to show everyone what you built this week? Caleb, who a week ago would not have made eye contact with a stranger, stepped forward with a quiet, newfound confidence. He held up his finished model rocket, a complex, beautifully constructed piece of amateur engineering. He looked out at the vast, silent audience, and he did not flinch. It's a 2-stage rocket with a parachute deployment system, he said, his voice clear and steady. Grandma taught me about thrust and trajectory. We're going to launch it on Saturday. A wave of astonished, appreciative applause swept through the room. I then turned to Zoe. And this is our Chief Emotional Intelligence Officer, I said. She giggled. Zoe, can you tell everyone about the most important tool we implemented this week? Zoe, a child who had once been a vessel of pure, unmanaged rage, stepped forward and pointed to a picture of the feelings chart on the screen behind us. That's our feelings chart, she said, her voice bright and proud. When you feel frustrated, you use your words instead of screaming. It's more of C. The audience laughed, a warm, genuine sound of delight and admiration. They saw not just a brilliant presentation, but the undeniable, heartwarming proof of its success. I stood up, my gaze sweeping over the audience before finally, deliberately landing on the front row, on the two pale, frozen figures who were the true subjects of my address. "It seems," I said, my voice ringing with a cold, clear, and final authority, "that the most valuable and complex systems in our lives are not the ones we build in our businesses, but the ones we are tasked with building in our own homes. The most important success is not the one we sell to others, but the one we live every single day." I looked directly at King. I saw a man hollowed out, a fraud exposed, a king dethroned in his own court. I saw my daughter Danielle, her face a mess of silent, streaming tears. The full public cost of her weakness and complicity was finally crashing down upon her. My consultation was now complete. The verdict had been delivered. All that remained was the sentencing. I picked up the crisp, cream-colored portfolio from the lectern. I held it up for the audience to see. "My work on this project was conducted pro bono," I said. "However, for the purposes of quantifying the value of such an intervention, I've prepared a full itemized invoice for my consulting services." I opened the portfolio and pulled out the invoice. I placed it deliberately on the lectern, the 5-figure sum at the bottom facing out towards the audience. A final shocking punctuation mark to my presentation. "And this," I declared, my voice echoing in the stunned silence, "is my fee." The silence in the conference hall held for a heartbeat, a moment of collective stunned disbelief. Then the room erupted. It was not the polite, scattered applause that had greeted the other speakers. It was a roar, a spontaneous, thunderous standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The audience was not clapping for a clever presentation. They were cheering for a public execution. They, the true leaders and entrepreneurs in the room, had recognized the charlatan in their midst, and they were celebrating his spectacular, brutal unmasking. They were applauding the raw, undeniable power of authentic expertise over hollow, self-promoting hype. Photographers, sensing the kill, rushed the stage, their flashes creating a strobe-like effect. Their cameras were not aimed at me, but at the invoice on the lectern, the 5-figure price tag, 51,155, a tangible, shocking symbol of the value of the nothing King had so arrogantly dismissed. King's brand, his entire carefully constructed identity, was not just damaged. It was annihilated. He was a fraud, a hypocrite, a man who sold systems for success he couldn't even implement in his own home. He and Danielle were trapped in the front row, a tableau of pure personal horror. King sat frozen, his face a ghostly white, a man who had been publicly and professionally disemboweled. Danielle had finally broken down completely, her body racked with the kind of deep, gut-wrenching sobs that come from a place of absolute, soul-crushing regret. She was faced not just with the collapse of her husband's career, but with the full public revelation of her own profound failure as a daughter and a mother. I did not wait for the applause to die down. My work was done. Justice, in its most precise and theatrical form, had been served. I turned away from the adoring crowd, away from the flashing cameras, away from the wreckage of my daughter's life. I took my transformed grandchildren by the hand. Caleb looked up at me, his eyes shining with a pride and admiration that was worth more than any standing ovation. Zoe squeezed my hand, her small gesture of votive confidence that was more powerful than any invoice. Elijah, who had woken up during the applause, simply smiled, a happy, secure child in a world that, for the past week, had finally made sense. We walked off the stage, not into the pandemonium of the conference hall, but out the same quiet, discreet side exit we had entered. We left the noise, the chaos, the entire fraudulent world behind us. As we stepped out into the cool, clean air of the late afternoon, I felt a sense of profound, somber victory. I had not just taught my son-in-law a lesson. I had been forced to pass judgment on my own daughter. I had been forced to choose between a passive, complicit love and a hard, active, and ultimately more meaningful form of justice. I had come out of retirement for one final, deeply personal project. The project was complete, the system had been rebooted, the phoenix had risen, and as I led my grandchildren towards the car, towards the quiet, orderly, and loving home we had built together, I knew with a certainty that was both heartbreaking and liberating. My real work was just beginning. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.